Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. The committee, which is the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, we're resuming our work on 213 and activating the regulation of wetlands for further development and dam safety. We're going to do a read through and markup of draft 3.1. Council is on its way here right now. And we are in that, I'd say, happy end phase on a bill where we have a markup, we have a room full of people with expertise and experience, and we'll do a read through. If there is a question, concerns, anything, as we read through a section, please, raise your hand, flag us down, so we'll have a discussion. But the goal is to resolve as many of the open items as possible this morning. I tediously refer to it as painting ourselves out of the room, but we will march towards the door and eliminate questions, make edits, and have a clean next draft to be voted by vote tomorrow. So, Mr. Grady, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
It's just the background noise. I don't know. I just what it is. It's coming to my
Now it's getting worse.
I asked, so I apologize. Nothing else I can do. Everything's sound is all off. Hopefully it's a little lower. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Grady, for getting us a draft even over the week. So we have more time to work and read. Just before you come in, I think people will do a read through again, and then I've asked people to flag them down.
There was a request, I believe it was from the agency on Friday to say, and not less than that.
If anyone has concerns, I'm going to assume that our conversation last week, but getting it right, if you're feeling like we're not there yet, don't be shy about it. If I don't see your hand, say something, please. I'm trying to look around and read, and sometimes I miss.
Moving on, page 3, subsection B and section 4 in the directive for A&R to be high quality wetlands inventory plus carbon mapping for all taxable basins. You have a condition that the agency shall update the taxable basin map when it determines if it's necessary.
We say it.
Yeah, this is Karina Daly, restoration ecologist with VNRC. Our position. Add to the paragraph in a way that helpful in our opinion.
I don't know if this language originated with agency, so Ms. Smith, will you speak to it all?
The last sentence that states the agency shall update the map when it determines necessary. It is our intention to update these maps as necessary. I do have one technical correction, and this is my own fault because I think I had included this language, but on page 3, starting line 5, it talks about the agency shall evaluate the need for tactical basin map updates. It should be NWI plus map updates. We're talking about the NWI map. And the bill asks us to complete that mapping on a basin-wide level, which will be done, but it's not actually called a tactical basin map, it's the NWI map.
Yeah,
So it would be NWI plus map on line 6, and then I guess not, it wouldn't be an issue if we strike the last sentence where it says tactical basin map.
So the last sentence is necessary. What, without that sentence there at all? I don't know that we're, I mean, it doesn't.
I can give you a little bit of background. So I think that sentence was added after Senator McCormick had expressed a concern about evaluate the need to update NWI maps, but then evaluate the need and update if needed. And so that sentence was added as a way to further flesh out that update if needed. But I'm not sure that it helps with that.
I don't think it has much effect legally. Because the agency has the ability to update when necessary anyway.
And it's totally permissive, it's an obligation. Well, so then it's, we might say superfluous, so then maybe it's worth deleting.
We're telling them this language. The legislature is telling the agency that it shall do something, and what it shall do is do it at once. That's strictly what we're saying.
Since it's not a big deal one way or the other, for now, let's let the label stand, and we can come back to it, if it becomes a concern, a deeper concern, okay?
On page 3, section 4, this is the necking of wetlands policy and state goal. Couple of drafts ago, there was reference to the term development on line 15 and then again on line 20. And there had been a proposal to replace development because development is not used in the wetland rule with the word impacted. But then if you go through the rest of this section, the trigger impact is adverse effects. And so I would suggest replacing impact with adverse, being affected or adverse effects.
Right. Yeah, let's align those. Thank you.
Say that one more time, what are you
So-
doing?
Yeah,
Page-
we would make that, the trigger grade match the. It's not this impact, but impact with adverse effect.
So we're adverse and affected or sometimes so. On page 3, in the directive on prioritizing protection of existing wetlands and the wetlands rules, there had been concern that it wasn't clear that the 5,000 square feet is not the 5,000 square feet of the wetland, it's 5,000 square feet of the adverse effect. And so that change was made on page 3. Was it just an informative and technical thing before adding above before adverse effect in line 2 down at the bottom of page 4, not quite at the bottom, line 14, and the minimum requirements for the wetlands rule, again making that change about clarifying it's 5,000 square feet of adverse effect in the wetland. And lots here. And then, when that net gain policy is supposed to be incorporated into permits. You push that out to September 1, 2025. Fill out the rollout.
So, that's the first of the dates, I think, but anyway, that flagging that we're going by. If, it's a goal of the committee to outline a plan of work that is workable for those who actually do it. So in general, I'm just saying, someone has a concern about a date, amount of time allocated for something, if you flag us now as we go through, I want to be aware of that.
So page 5 are additional requirements for incorporation into the rule. Going down to page 5, line 18, when there's going to be an in fee compensation program that may be authorized for adverse effect. The rule will address that. The secretary may implement that in lieu of compensation program through agreements with third parties such as the Corps, the environmental organizations. Provided that any in lieu compensation shall be expended in restoration of street establishment, enhancement, or conservation projects within the state at the update level. Then you get to page 6, line 8, the wetlands programs reports. Remember, there's now 2 reports. One is annually about annual losses and gains. There was one change here, page 7. There was a duplicative subdivision that was removed. Same substance as in subdivision 3 that was in subdivision 5. And then on page 7, line 6, this is the 5-year report on the comprehensive status of wetlands in the state, including the NWI plus mapping project. Section 5 on page 8. Which is conforming change to enforcement provision in Title 10, Chapter 47, regarding enforcement and protection of state waters. Because you added wetlands as one of those protected functions under the water quality standard. It makes sense to include wetlands here in this enforcement provision. Moving on. Page 9, line 11, this is the appropriations for the wetlands program. It had been previously 1,500,000 for kind of mapping and rollout, and 500 for staff. I believe it was Karina said that the mapping had already been satisfied, that you moved it down to 750, but it's all going to be for 5 new positions to implement and comply with the other sections in the rule, sections in the act regarding wetlands.
So let me just, Ms. Davis.
Yes, Karina Dan for the record. After further discussion, and with taking into account the changes that we've revised, in collaboration with the agency, the mapping task and the reporting tasks have been substantially reduced. And we feel that we should revise that number to include 2 full-time staff positions.
Which would be in our current budget,
250.
250 instead of. We're doing 100, but we're doing 50 of. And.
You can do 150 add or 125. There is no defined number right now. You kind of look at the skill and professional necessity for each of these positions. I think 125 to 150 probably is perfect.
I'm gonna look over your shoulder to Ms. Smith. If we're going ahead and creating these positions, do you have a recommendation as to what the default figure should be per person for a team?
The default number for an FTE is 150,000 for the agency.
So then 750 becomes 300, and then 5 becomes 2. Is that correct? As proposed by Ms. Daly. So let me check in with Ms. Smith or anyone else from the agency who can speak to this. We're changing the allocation of money and resource for it. I don't know if you're saying if you're comfortable with that change, or we want to go ahead and do it. It takes more staff than to,
I will be honest, I am not the authority on determining FTEs requested by the agency. I do agree with Karina that the original appropriation for the mapping has largely been taken care of by funding that the agency's acquired and continues to acquire through grants. I think that, and I don't remember the FTEs that the program has identified for the reporting. I do think 2 would cover the requirements outlined in this bill.
sure, okay, great, so let's make a change, and Mr. Brady, can you keep, well, all the changes we'll make as of today will flag in this version, right? Highlight?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if in the next 18 hours, you have a conversation that changes your minds, we'll have a chance to revise it before. Right, let's keep going, thank you.
Page 9, section 7. This is the requirement that DEC do the infill mapping of the river corridor base map. And then to do education and outreach. This section is entirely new. The first thing you'll see is the deadline for DEC to amend the statewide river corridor base map to identify areas within municipal designated centers that are suitable for infill, and that will not cause or contribute to increases in fluvial hazards. Then you will see an education and outreach requirement, a 2-year requirement, beginning January 1, 2025, and ending January 1, 2027. DEC conducts education and outreach, consult with and collect input from municipalities, businesses, and other interested parties of the public regarding how state permitting and development and after the part of be implemented, including potential restrictions on the use of land within after corridors. They develop educational materials for the public. They collect input from the public. They report to you midway through the education and outreach regarding the public input and recommendations based on the public input for changes to the requirements for state permitting and development and after the corridors.
Thank you. Anyone? Results?
Lauren Oates, the Nature Conservancy, for the record. I guess I have one clarifying question on the education and outreach, and that is, it looks like a 2-year, January 2025, 2027, with a report due at the midway point. Is that accurate, that we want a midway point education report out with a year left?
So the midway point is there so that the General Assembly has ability to react legislatively before the rulemaking, which is January 1, 2020. So the rulemaking, pre-rulemaking probably would start right around the time of January 1, 2027. That's not before then. It's all about what you want to do with the dates and how you want to account for giving the agency time or not. I mean, you don't have to give the agency time, they'll just not meet the deadlines. And you'll,
Yeah, that seems like a non-ideal solution.
to see later on.
So, want to pause on the timeline is important. I mean, the committee spent a long time, doing pretty much a complete rewrite of the EJ bill years ago, and we're going to hear from the agencies tomorrow. Carla Ramondi's coming, and we're going to be talking. So I want to make there, and there is a phrase that came out of that work, and also at the Climate Council about moving at the speed of trust. So we're talking about a process that's going to affect a lot of people's lives, the way they live in spaces and how we develop. So my concern is that we build a timeline that allows for adequate participation all the way around, and while still making timely progress, because we're under pressure from increasing floods that seem to be generally more damaging here like here. I don't know if anyone from agency has any feedback on it. Mr. Adams.
Rob Evans for the record, Rivers Program Manager in ANR. I'll just restate.
Yeah.
That the agency's timeline that it provided a few weeks back is still what we're more comfortable with, just understanding it's gonna take time to staff up. It's gonna take time to then, train that staff to free up expert staff work on this. It's gonna require expert staff and new staff. And so, yeah, we're more comfortable with the tune than we provided a few weeks ago, which stretches us out to 2029, 2020, 2030.
Okay, so if we have a started on January 1, 2025, lines 4, page 10. This rolls out through, rulemaking, I'm trying to see if I'm.
So the rulemaking is not, you don't see that until page 12. Lines 19 and 20, before January 1, 2028, they adopt the rules.
Sorry, what page is that?
Page 12, line 19 and 20.
Okay, so we have a 3-year. Thank you for that. Engagement and outreach, education, and then rulemaking itself is another engagement.
Okay, so you have input mapping, info mapping. That starts January 1, 2026. There's no deadline for it. Except that the rules for permitting development have to be adopted by January 2020.
Right, so I think, Susan Watson.
Thank you. There's not a provision here that discusses when rulemaking or pre-rulemaking ought to start. Is that correct?
Hold on a second. There's my keys.
Rebecca Baker for the Rivers Program. There's 2 different rulemakings. There's the river corridor
Right.
rulemaking, and then there's the rulemaking for state minimum flood hazard stickers that are currently incorrect. So
The previous,
the river corridor.
the river corridor,
rulemaking-
since that's what we're at right now.
So on page 29. The agency shall initiate rulemaking, including pre-rulemaking for the rules required under sections 9, which are the river corridor rules. And they have to initiate that on a report January 1, 2026. Not effective date decision.
So. How long if they're starting on January 2026. The pre-rulemaking, how long, just one more reminder, how long does rulemaking typically take?
If you are going to comply with the requirements of APA, the fastest you can do it is in 5.5 months. It's typically 8 to 9 months. Sometimes it is longer, especially when an LCAR takes a long time to review.
So on the long end, it's 8 to 9 months.
I would say the long end is like 10 to 11 months.
Okay, so somewhere in the 8 to 10.
Not just the APA, that's not pre-rulemaking.
Okay.
That's not. No, drafting.
So how about this? We use a visual timeline to help see how these pieces are lining up, what the starts and stops were. Unless someone wants to flag a date in particular and make a suggestion, I suppose we leave the dates as is, draw that timeline back out and certainly I'll put that on my to-do list. Circulate it to people for today's meeting. So that tomorrow come in and see it more clearly and make adjustments if we can get clear narrative.
Well, one thing definitely needs to change, that's on page 29, line 8, that effective date of the rules. That should be 2028 underneath the timeline right now.
Good.
It should
Yeah,
be,
right, because
To line up with elsewhere in
the
the.
lineup was section 9. Which is on page 12, it should be January 1, 2028.
and you do have July there, 2028,
Yeah.
so this should be 2028 here.
Sarah McDonald, and then we'll go to Mr. Cancel.
So where this is all goes smoothly according to plan, that everybody did what they were supposed to do. By 2028, Vermont would be ready to implement rules to tackle 2023 type flooding.
You would be ready to permit developments in infill in the river corridor.
Tackling, addressing 2023 type floods.
And you're not gonna prevent a flood. You're going to permit the development and infill of the map river corridors.
In an effort to
Say, of minimize, reduce future, damages to people who are.
If I may, I'll just add a finer point to that. It's just minimizing those new encroachments that aren't regulated now, new homes going in the river corridor that are at risk. The channelization that follows to protect those homes that increases the risk, so it's dealing with that kind of piecemeal development up and down the river valley to try to keep it outside of that meander belt space that we're in.
Mr. Campbell?
Chris Anthony, Winter Region Commission, for the record, the only thing I would just throw out is that you're amending an existing rule. And you're amending an existing rule that was created in the wake of Irene and subsequent events that caused substantial damage to property. And this is also a particularly violent type of flood event, that rips the land underneath structures. And I would just urge you to move as expeditiously as you feel is possible, because we've been talking about this for over a decade now. And the challenge has been deferring to towns having the political and operational capacity to actually adopt these rules. And then be able to administer them once they are adopted. And the point of what I've been saying in the past is that we need to regulate this at a point where it has the most effect. In order, because this is life safety policy, this isn't habitat, this isn't, this is about real harm being done to Vermonters. Not only is it the property that suffers the immediate harm of the stream bank or riverbank erosion, but then also whatever gets carried downstream to flood a culvert, flood a bridge, or flow into another dwelling. So I guess I would just say, it's up to you. I mean, I'm not always going to say what to do, but I feel a certain sense of urgency because in our region, we also had significant flooding in 2021. We had flooding in 2023, the last 4 Christmases, right around the Christmas season. We've had significant flooding, so that's looking more like a trend as opposed to, I mean, I have no idea why it's been, but in the southeast part of the state, where we're particularly flashy and have lots of erodible river and stream corridors, this is a problem. And so I would just ask you to move as fast as you feel like is responsible for Vermonters.
Thank you. Sarah Watkins.
Thank you. So I guess I would like to be a proposal about a slightly faster timeline. So if rulemaking starts January 1st, 2026, and rulemaking typically takes the long side 11 months, I guess I'd be more comfortable pushing back the rules effective date into 2027. What's that?
Versus 2028.
Versus 2028. And yeah, because we gotta, because I feel that sense of urgency as well. Yeah, I guess I'd like to at least. I would like to, but
Sure.
yeah.
No, I mean, if, for instance, if the begin rulemaking on or for January 1, 2026. We have an effective date of July 1, 2027. So in a year.
that feels like.
Even in the contentious things, that seems like.
And when do you want the public outreach
Oh,
education to go on? During the rulemaking?
If I may, again, Rob Evans, if I could just interject here, I think we prefer for the rulemaking to be after the education outreach, because there's information we might get from that feedback. That back and forth that informs how we update not just the rule, but our general permit, our mapping procedures, all of that. There are a number of things that need to be updated and fine tuned, not just the ruling. So I hate to get, halfway down the rulemaking process and then you're gonna have to go backwards to make recommendations.
Generally, we're talking maps first. Public outreach starts to follow on during the mapping process, rulemaking follows on that. So Mr. Grady, can you help us locate in the bill when the public outreach piece gets?
It's page 10, line 4. So public outreach is supposed to end January 1st, 2027. And so it seems to me that there's a potential to have, because the mapping is overlapping with the education. And so it makes sense to me to have at least even pre-rulemaking start and have it overlap some with the education and outreach, it's starting in 2026, so that's sort of in the middle. So hopefully with education starting in 2025, there'll be hopefully what needs to be done in terms of determining some of those questions for the pre-rulemaking can be done early, and then we can start to, at least the rulemaking process can get underway, but obviously it will go beyond. Well, if we were to end in July 2027, then there's even time after the education and outreach is even completed.
So not having been involved firsthand in doing this work, if you were to have an outreach program that ran 2 years, the midpoint of it, rulemaking commenced, but would that seem workable, or you would want more education and outreach time before rulemaking itself would?
It's hard to forecast. Again, it's like we all make headway with the resources we have to do headway. That's really what it comes to. So, we will shoot for whatever dates are put in front of us if this passed into law, but I just can't guarantee we'll meet those dates,
Yeah. Of course,
that's gonna be.
and we're gonna make a best faith effort to provide the resource to make the data feasible, for everyone's good. Single card.
What is the very first step in this process?
So the mapping, there's no an initiation for the mapping, but it has to be done on or before January 1, 2026. And then education is going to begin January 1, 2025. So those two are probably kind of the first two things that are going to happen.
And the education does not have to be, does the mapping have to be done before the education, or the education have to be done before the mapping?
The mapping and the education are ongoing requirements, that are simultaneous requirements under what's proposed. I would defer to the agency as to whether or not they can do both.
And that begins this process. Why are we waiting till next year? to Begin it, why don't we start it? 2024.
It's because I don't have resources to dedicate to it. We're still in flood recovery mode and down 3 staff currently in the program. So it's that lag to get new staff, train them up, free up existing staff. So that's just a harsh reality of all this.
It's really hard to hire people right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
To your question about the mapping and the outreach, we want at least some set of draft maps. It wouldn't have to be statewide for every downtown and village center, but we want some draft maps that we could take out to do that education outreach with those.
And I think some of In some of the education outreach will probably help inform the mapping process as to whether we wanna. Does anything need to be changed or
Right.
updated?
Yep.
What do we consider for that info? So one will probably inform the other. Here, and come through. Okay.
I'm just tripping into an regional commission. I think, I mean, I can certainly volunteer RRPC that. If part of that education outreach is doing webinars, working with conservation district and other partners. And we've got the information about why river corridor development is dangerous and why we need to allow room for those river streams to move. We can do that. We can start that process now. I'm a little nervous to volunteer all my colleagues, but the information exists. We can collaborate together to put that information there. We've got information on the flood ready site. So we can harness that information. It's already there. It may not say, now these are the specific maps, these are the changes, but we can talk about what the risks are.
Well, thank you. So, sorry.
I have a question on the mapping. I started the conversation, I think, I said 2 comments, and we got into timeline, but the mapping, as I understand it from the committee's conversation on Friday. Was that you would pull that mapping language out of rulemaking and insert it into the front of the bill, as was done, but I see it in both places. Was that intentional? And if so, just to understand that, if it wasn't intentional, I want to flag that the language around the mapping had some changes. The language at the top of the bill, page 9, line 20, is where it starts, is different from what the committee had agreed to, the changes in the mapping language in the past, so. I'm flagging that the mapping is in 2 places and is worded differently.
And what's the second location?
Second location where the mapping shows up is in rulemaking on. Anybody finds it before me, please.
Is it 29? Yeah.
Page 13, minus 19, those.
Oh.
Yes, thanks.
Could you say those page and line again, please?
Page 13, line 19.
So if the intent is to pull it out of rulemaking. The language that the committee had agreed to, and that several of us testified in support of. Was the language that's currently on page 13, line 19. So we would just like to see that it was pulled out of rulemaking, that be the language that's carried out to page 9, line 20.
The agency would prefer that it not be in rulemaking. Our existing rule points to our mapping procedure.
Yeah.
Which is signed by our commissioner, so we would embed all that in our procedure.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessary to do the infill mapping by way of rulemaking authority.
We're thinking about, hey, let's,
But the language on section 89. About. Areas within municipal designated centers that are suitable for infill. I believe that came from the discussion on Friday, meeting infill mapping. I don't know if the language on page 13 going on 14 is the same in the agency's perspective or not. I will do whatever the committee wants me to do.
That section is kind of more tied to like just the authority to regulate those areas. Less than kind of the mapping itself, and it's tied to the mapping, obviously, but I think that language still makes sense.
I believe the language that's currently page 9, line 20 was from the original bill. That has since been amended several times over into what is now page 13, line 19.
so mapping by procedure is more flexible, and there's an education and outreach program going along with it, that's a clear concern we've been articulating, then, can you just say a little bit about? If someone said, well, will the procedure guarantee public process? And you just comment on the public process piece of the procedure.
Yeah, I haven't looked in depth at our procedure, but we walk through notification of towns and district commissions, and we publish draft maps for comment before we get them official. So that's all laid out currently in our mapping procedure, and would say we might fine tune it, of course, but sure.
Okay, so if that makes, then section 7, beginning to line 2021, you don't need to specify as a rule. I just want to make sure that we have coherent language that triggers it as a procedure later. And required rulemaking content, the rules shall, and when marches through.
And again, if helpful, I can send a specific text from the rule right now that links the mapping to our procedure. It's codified in rule. So there's a linkage to exists.
So we still have the rulemaking, and line 4 of page 13 says, here's what the rules address. But then in sub 5, line 19, it says a process.
Yes.
So that's the flexibility pivot there, like, so rulemaking that specifies a process, but. Then the process is you administer it under your current procedure.
Yeah, I take that as a directive to amend our mapping procedure accordingly.
That makes
It makes sense to me, but I don't know if it makes sense to others.
um,
And I don't know if the language on section 7 is what the others want.
right, so then we have to, score. I understand the change, and I just want to try to make sure that we keep all the years meshed together. Ms. Smith, you have your hand up.
To emphasize Rob's point, the agency has the directive to move forward with the mapping. We will we'll be able to move more quickly if it's not tied to the rulemaking, but there is a distinction in the language. On page 9, going on to top of page 10, it talks about mapping areas within municipal designated centers. And on the top of 14, it talks about areas within existing settlement suitable for development. And I assume there was a reason for that distinction. The other piece on line 13, on page 13, is the collaboration with RPCs, which again, I think could be part of the process, doesn't have to be tied to rulemaking. But I would suggest that in that language that begins on page 9, we just clarify whether we're talking about designated centers or existing settlements, and add the piece on collaboration with our partner organizations.
I think existing settlements was desired by partners because it's more expansive than just those match designated centers. It's kind of that developed footprint. So I think most agree with the existing settlements being focused on.
And so it's strictly that in 2 different places at the same time. But the existing set, right, we talked about the broader existing settlement. So it's on the top of page 14.
I think Henry's proposal from bottom of page 13, top of page 14, taking that section and essentially moving it out of rulemaking, moving it up to page. In where there's the other information already around at the beginning, page 10, line. Page 9, line 20. From the second and the other sections.
But do you want the rules to include a process for amending the maps going into the future?
We're comfortable with that. Sure.
So that would mean it's in both places.
No, I think basically you moved, as was just said, the language from 13 to 14 to 9 and 10. And then you refine the language on 13 to 14, that the rules will include the process for amending future statewide recorded base maps to identify. I would just say amending for a future amendment of pre-recorded base maps.
That all sounds good to me.
So to build the process, the ongoing process you'll use over the year and to the rules.
And then as Hannah suggested, that coordination or collaboration with ACCD and the regional planning commission will be moved to page 9 and 10 as well.
Let's do that. And then, of course, you'll see it highlighted in the next draft, so see if we get all the stars aligned. Thank you, everyone.
Still haven't decided the timeline.
Sooner the better.
Yes.
Right, so, Senator Watson had a suggestion that came up on page 29 that rules in completed, it gives a 18-month window, like January 126 through July 127. That's, I don't know why we have 28, that's a 2.5 year timeline. There's seems longer than I've ever seen before, but
I was just following my notes from Friday.
I know, I'm not blame, there's no blame, this is just trying to make sure that we can, all the adjustments fine. So I can start my suggestion about 2027 there.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. So mapping is going to be done January 1, 2026. Correct? Is that everybody's okay? Okay, and then on page 10. When does education and out?
25.
January 2025.
Yep.
And it ends January 1, 2027.
Yep.
Okay, then moving on to page 12. When will rules be required to be adopted?
July
27.
really only 6 months faster than what's.
And then, since we don't have to skip 20 pages in the future, when do you want that pre-rulemaking to start?
It's bring education outreach, I would think, I don't know if we need to. That's a good, well, I think it's helpful to specify that they found, but I also feel like agencies will know as they're doing their work when they want to get started.
Okay, so you're not gonna have, because I defer to the chair's preference to always have to start by and end by date.
Yeah,
So you're not gonna have a start by date.
well, so let me check in with Mr. Evans, who was shocked, we most in charge of education outreach, right? What is, if you were for clarity in the bill, say, when these different activities begin, what would you recommend as a start date on the education outreach?
Oh, I think what you have in the bill now is workable in terms of time frame. And if we have partners that are helping us, absolutely. And I know we at least have a few, so we can get started as soon for sure. How long it takes to do it justice, then we'll see.
Let's leave the date as its first start.
For start date.
Yeah.
That's the 26th. Okay. And then on page 13,
Knowing that RPCs might voluntarily begin to work in these.
it's page 15, when you want the permit requirement 15 months. Right now, it's July 1, 2028. That was 6 months from the previous rulemaking deadline. So do you want to do it January 1, 2028?
Right, that would be 6 months after. Then McCormick, so yeah, but that would sync up 6 months following end of ruling.
Yes.
Then McCormick,
Just so I can sleep fifth-free. The people who will actually have to do this, the people with the feet on the ground. Are of the opinion that we can't start it any earlier. Or finish it any earlier than it's being.
I'm concerned at this point. Let's put it that way. It's knowing the lag time it takes to staff up and train them. it's a concern meeting, but again, we'll shoot for them if that's what ends up coming, but.
The worst bosses I ever had were the ones who was always something they wanted done and just say, just do it. And I was like, no, go back, just do it. So we can't do that. You weren't saying that this is the schedule yet. I'll be realistic.
Yeah,
On the three open positions, so this is under current authorization. It's just, you don't have people to fill slots, so we're starting a little bit in the hole, is what I'm learning, yes.
I'll just say from our hiring perspective, we used to get 50 applications, we now get 4. And 2 of them are qualified. Right, and I'm like, that's the nature of hires now.
and you're often have to go out and repost again, we might interview folks and say, oh, they're not a good fit, we need to see if we can.
So
It takes some currently.
I would say everyone's trying to make a best faith effort to go as quickly as possible without causing problems for the legal itself. So we also are going to have legislative sessions each year in between. Report coming back, we'll have conversations. I think I would just want this committee to stay aware of how things are going and that we make adjustments as necessary to make speed and what works. Okay.
And just to make a comment, it's not that there won't be any outreach and education around river corridors between now and this beginning of the outreach session, because we are currently working with regional planning commissions to do outreach to towns on river corridor and floodplain bylaws. So we're having that conversation. It's mostly focused on municipalities and like planning commissions, like decision-making bodies. But there is some of that kind of pre-work going on, so we'll be starting totally from scratch at that time. Okay.
So do you want to, based on the conversation, discussion, decisions made, where do you want to resume?
Page 13.
Yeah.
And the required rulemaking content. One of the things you wanted to specify is that the rules for river corridor development will provide for exemptions from permitting for use of general permits for certain development. The agency already had general permit authority on page 14. This is just gonna, and you'll see on page 14 that it specifies that the general permits don't have to be implemented by rule. But what you will be doing on page 13 in the rulemaking is when they can be issued for what type of development will. I mean, the river corridor rules already do that. So you're just basically duplicating that kind of how they're gonna do it.
So Watson?
Just to clarify, so this is like the part where we say it's okay to,
It's okay to do the general permits.
right,
And what are you gonna do the general permits for? When you actually issue the general permit, you don't do it by rule.
I have a quick question on, because we have existing rulemaking authority for things that are exempt from municipal regulations. Does that need to be maintained in the language of this bill until a new rule of some sort goes into place? Because right now it's struck. I'm not being all.
If you have there's a transition section later on that says until you adopt these rules and are permitting, that you operate under the old rules.
Speed reading.
Page 13, line 19, you're gonna amend that. It's no longer gonna be as detailed, it's just gonna set forth a process for amending the state library order maps. Page 14, lines 14 through 16, we just talked about. The agency, we might have to go to rulemaking, just do a general permit. Page 15, line 7, in the permitting requirement, removing that date from July 1, 2028 to January 1, 2028. It's no longer about when the municipality is adopted flood hazard area bylaw or not. And then you can go to page 17, section 10. We're moving out of river corridors, we're moving into state flood hazard area.
Before we go. Send me over.
Two things. This is a question for anybody in the room with a Juris Doctor, of which I am not. Page 15, line 7, the permit requirement section. My read of this is now that it says development in a flood hazard area or mapped river corridor, that would have the unintended, I believe, consequences saying that the new expanded rule would be for the floodplain as well and not just for the river corridor, which this committee has agreed to. So I think that you'd want to strike flood hazard area and have this just be the permit requirement for the mapped river corridor, as I read it.
Correct, and I think going back to what Rebecca called out, there might be some additional wordsmithing here, because the municipally exempt activities for river corridors and flood hazard areas, that needs to be maintained as it is going forward, and we're adding to that development broadly in map river corridors. So there's gonna still be state regulation of flood hazard areas for those activities that towns aren't allowed to regulate, so there's some structural changes we'll need to make in the text, I think.
Yeah, this language right now that we're talking about on page 15, line 7, and also the language on beginning page 12, line 20. It does still refer to development within a flood hazard area or mapped river corridor. So the way the bill is written now, the committee is asking A&R to take over statewide regulation of both of those pieces beginning January 1st, 2028. I don't know if that's the intention. If not, then flood hazard area should be struck from both of those lines.
Well, I think what we ended up doing was saying that the standards will get developed and that the study committee would address whether or not the state should then take over. Yeah, things like that. So the one on sorry, where were you? I'm kind of looking for.
It's really on the heading on page 12.
Oh.
Line 9. And then on page 12, going on page 13.
Yes.
Line 2.
So we'll be striking map river, sorry. Striking flood hazard area out of that head.
You have a lot of decisions to be made.
Yep.
With regard to what you're gonna permit through A&R, what you're gonna permit through municipalities. Because you're gonna come to some informing sections later on. Where I'm not sure what you wanna do, and so with grade. So. This is just the beginning of that, like, what do you really wanna do?
So, we were supporting the statewide flood hazard area. Standard bylaws. But not pushing the question as to whether or not they were going to be implemented into the study. So in terms of like the rulemaking and et cetera. We wouldn't want to inadvertently specify that the decision's already been made and that they're obligated to implement. So that means the change to the head, line 9, page 12. Right?
Yeah,
Okay,
so just walking through what you're gonna change, page 12, line 9, you're gonna change the header of that section from no longer. Flood hazard areas. Page 12, line 19, you're changing the date from January 1 to July 1. From 2028 to 2027.
Yeah.
You are on page 13, line 2, striking reference to a flood hazard area. On page 13, you're changing the process language for amending river corridor maps in the future.
Watson,
Thank you. Sorry, I just want to check before we leave. This section. Because this is existing. law, we're amending existing law, and so does. I think my question is, do we? Actually, I think I'm gonna hold off on my question, because I think it's really just, it's wrapped up in whether or not we have a statewide minimum standard, and okay, I'm worried that if we, well, I'm gonna hold off on the question, okay, never mind.
I had to go for the question, maybe on the header, for page 12, line 9 with the header, because it's an existing rule and we will still need to maintain regulation of flood hazard areas. Should we still keep flood hazard areas in that line?
No, we're gonna deal with that through a transition clause. You're gonna amend the sections like right away, but then in transition, you're gonna say you're gonna retain that authority over. Municipally exempt, and then later on, and where you're doing. The state flood hazard area standards, I think you might want to put language there that you're gonna regulate. The,
Flood hazard areas.
yeah, the municipally exempt.
Thank you for handling that question.
That's what I was thinking that you were getting at, because. So we will still, well. I don't know.
I think the transition section is gonna be important, and probably not sufficient, I think.
Nice, okay. Thank you, and can you remind me again, sorry, the date you have on line 20, page 12 is. Amended to what?
It's July 1, 2027.
Okay.
There is another change on page 13. In line 13 to 18, where it's referencing the requirements and process for municipality to be delegated. They're only gonna be delegated in development in a map or recorder and not in a flood hazard area. So that will change there as well.
Lines 14, 15.
14, 15, and then 16.
Under page 13, line 9. Then if we're gonna be dealing with flood hazard areas transition language, then does that matter if that's the name?
Yeah, probably.
River corridor standards would not be tied into requirements for the actions.
Sorry, what line were you on there?
Sorry, line 9 of page 13 was B2, the design to ensure the state municipalities make community availability terms for the
It's lines 5 through 10, really. Goes 5 through 8 is NFIP as well.
Better just focus on the state room for ours.
Do you want development and river corridors to be subject to the NFIP regulatory obligations?
Well, there are different regulations and standards, so. If they're in map flood hazard areas, they will already be subject to municipally regulated flood hazard area rules. It
Okay.
would be under the state's jurisdiction, it would be under the municipal jurisdiction.
Okay.
Because we would only be looking at through a state permit. River corridor, which have different types of standards than municipal flood hazard areas.
Is FEMA sort of belongs to the river corridor regulation?
Yes. They have language and statute that acknowledges erosion, but there's no standards that are tied to it. And there's no insurance no insurance requirements tied to being in a yeah. It's only in my stuff that's raised.
Then I think on page 14, lines 4 and 5, you have the strike reference in line 8, strike reference to NFIP.
This is all dependent on if we don't,
Right.
uh,
Right.
yeah, I'm listening where,
If you go to the statewide, state hazard area standards, yes.
then we have to do this. If we don't,
If you don't,
then we need to.
right.
So we should take it out.
Until there's a decision to add it in. It's, evaluated in the future, like the study committee will make recommendation.
So later in the bill, we do not set forward state standards, it's written.
No, you do.
Yeah, so that's where.
But because municipalities might adopt it voluntarily, but they could step up, right? This wouldn't say that you must step up.
I guess I'm now confused.
I think there's two things, here. As I understand it, as I read it, that there's language to create a statewide minimum flood hazard standard that municipalities adopt.
Yes,
So there's like a bottom level for
Yes.
municipalities for their participation, which I see that going forward. There's language around creating a study committee to look at statewide regulation of flood hazard areas and how that would look. And that recommendations coming out of that would include legislative suggestions and for statute change. So it's kind of the question of, there's a statewide minimum floodplain standards for municipalities. Do we as a state regulate floodplains in any way, make recommendations with statute suggestions? And as it was before we're making these changes, it's basically saying, essentially like, we would be regulating flood hazard areas coming out of the study committee. But I don't think that that's the intent. I think the intent is that
it's more open.
commission or the study committee would make recommendations, and from that, you would decide where do we go?
So Mr. Chair, I have compromised on not going further than we.
Right.
Because of the administration's perspective on this and the inability to fully staff it to meet the needs is basically where I have landed, because what I heard is we would have to hire 15 to 20 folks to actually implement what we had originally discussed. And I am leaning towards the study committee being more focused on how would we do this. So it seems like that's what we are debating, is whether or not we want it to be more open and have the study committee potentially come back and say, actually, we don't think it should be state level, or not done exclusively by municipalities. But for me, I do think that that's the question, and I'd like them to explore that rather than keep it as is.
Right. Right.
And maybe it's even a more nuanced question of, should it be done regionally versus should it be done at the state level? Or should it be supported at the state level, but whatever the right authority is leveraged to RPCs versus the state. So I don't know what that means for the language. But-
When we do the study committee, and let's.
But don't we need to make a decision on this, and that would inform the study committee? If I understood Ms. Cypher's point. Is if this is the way this language is written, is it's assuming my perspective rather than what the administration has advocated for, which is a more open-ended question.
You mean
So-
unresolved?
Yeah, or like a less leading, I don't know how to put that, a less directed. If I'm understanding the concern.
This is based on the rivers behaving a certain way, and they are directing the maps. And now we're gonna, once you have maps, and the state says you ought to do one thing, and the municipality say, no, we don't wanna do that, where's the tiebreaker? Where is the tiebreaker?
Yeah.
And if you don't have a tiebreaker, this is all talk.
Yeah.
What's the tiebreaker? Question.
I think the Senator White's point, I think, if the assumption of the committee and of the legislation is that there will be some other authority regulating flood hazard areas besides municipalities, whether it's a mix or a blend or some other recommendation, then you probably would leave all these references that we've been striking to the National Flood Insurance Program in, because there would be some assumption of some sort of state rule or program that would come back into some rulemaking, almost like the flood hazard areas would catch up to the river corridor through rulemaking. Like river corridors are going forward, we had a study committee to talk about floodplains and then they catch up.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I've been thinking, or they're totally separated and different.
That's really not how the bill's set up,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Right now, the agency has to adopt required state flood hazard area standards for development in flood hazard areas by January 1. No, actually, they're January 1, 2026. And then all municipalities that implement an NFIP program have to adopt those statewide standards by January 1, 2028.
I think the 2026 data, as I read it, was for the statewide minimum standards for municipalities. And then you have a study commission that's going concurrently with that,
Right,
and then the study committee would come out with some sort of,
but that's a future legislative decision.
yes, okay.
The legislation doesn't need to address that right now. If they want to change it into like A&Rs regulating it all,
You do with that.
that's future. What you're doing here in this bill is A&R's got minimum standards. Municipalities and NFIP have to adopt that minimum standard. So you're not going to municipalities and like, oh, you don't, this municipality is this and that, but not that, etc. What you need in that language on page 17 going on to page 18 is that the rules will address how development except for municipal regulation will.
Oh. Okay.
Right?
On page 17, I read that as the statewide minimum floodplain standard for municipalities.
I think what Mike is, the state would have to, this would have to be amended to include our regulation of areas exempt from municipal regulation. So we'd be pulling the language that's currently in 754, putting it in 755, saying we're adopting a statewide minimum flood hazard area standard. It's implemented by the state in areas exempt from municipal regulation and implemented by municipalities who participate in NFIP everywhere else.
Right.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, so there was also a conversation about places that the state does currently regulate in those areas that are special. And I can't remember exactly all the different categories that you snap.
State buildings, agriculture, silviculture, and energy projects that go through the public utility, and towns can't regulate, so we do currently.
Okay, so we're not setting ourselves up for some strange system.
All I would say is we need to maintain that, as long as towns can't regulate it, because the state would be out of compliance with the NFIP if we don't.
Okay,
Can the state regulate that? Either.
now, yeah, they do.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that before putting this in, we're not somehow then.
So, that helpful clarification about,
Page 17.
we don't need to sort of preload the language in, that will be part of a coherent statutory change in that future legislation. Not, we don't need to like stub it in there, but maybe we're gonna do it. Okay, so Senator Watson.
Thank you. So just want to check, with the state books about capacity. Well, yeah, well, so, because I'm saying that we're on page 17 now. I was kind of holding off on this question. Actually, did you, sorry.
So I keep saying I have like 2 points when I get through one and then I start a whole, so I'm sorry, but before we get into floodplains, I have 2 more comments on the report, and I'll say them quickly, and I'll say them in order before I forget. The first, I do want to flag on page 13, line 11, this exemption from permitting use of general permits for certain development feels really vague. You know, what would clarify, or what would be classified as certain development that would then get an exemption? It feels like a space for significant loopholes for development. I'm happy to look at that more, but just seeing that, it is a flag for concern for me. And the other question is starting on page 15, line 9 or line 18, the delegation section. As I understand it, there was a recommendation that municipalities who want to opt in to the new river corridor permitting program, they could be they could issue or have issuing authority. This first one though says a secretary may delegate to another state agency the authority to implement these rules. I don't know that I've ever seen secretary to state agency to state agency delegation. I don't know if that was supposed to mean the municipality or.
No, it was supposed to mean it was post Irene legislation, since we were regulating things that implicated other state agencies. The idea is we could delegate some or all of our authority to V-Trans to regulate their infrastructure. Delegate some or all of it to the Agency of Ag. We talked to them about it. We said, we're ready to talk if you're interested. You show us you have the capacity to do it. They've never raised their hand. So that's just sits idle in there. They can raise their hand anytime.
Okay, thank you.
And I think to your point on page 14, starting on line 14, 15, 16 about the. Oh, no, sorry, wrong. Line or page 13, line 11 about the exemptions. We currently have exemptions in our rules, so that's established by rulemaking. But, and there's.
But I don't know where that language came from. Can someone explain what the exemption question is? And what we need example?
I'll hazard a guess. I think it's just a desire for some flexibility around certain types of development.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I don't know if that language is either helpful or harmful. I mean, I think exemptions is a touchy thing. The way we add flexibility to our general permit is as I showed or shared with you previously, we have low risk things we'll put in a non-reporting category. You might be able to add some development into the non-reporting category. The other thing we have, like for linear development, for power and transportation, knowing that those have to crisscross floodplains and streams all the time, is we have an escape hatch in our rule that they demonstrate that there's no practicable alternative, and they have to walk through and demonstrate, like, we need to do this is critical infrastructure, it has to be here, we've explored all alternatives. We might need to do something for that from that river corridors. I think about people that are in the river corridor now, they need to replace their septic system. Maybe they need to put the mound a little closer to the river because there's nowhere else to put it. We can work that kind of language into the general permit, so.
Their current exemptions are like. Maintenance of existing structures, like you don't need to come to us to get a permit if you're maintaining your structure without changing the footprint, like maintenance of like roads, like repaving roads. But if you start to change dimensions or add fill or anything like that, then all of a sudden now you're triggering permit requirements.
So the exemptions that are in the rule right now are removal of the structure, the removal of any other improvement to property, whole or in part. So long as the ground elevations under and adjacent to the removed structure or improvement remain unchanged. The next is maintenance or repair of development in the usual course of business, does not include substantial improvements to structures. The next is repair, replacement, maintenance, reconstruction of transportation and utility networks, provided that they're approximately the same vertical and horizontal dimensions, shall include repaving of transportation networks. And then there are further exceptions. So, there are exemptions. There are exemptions under the current rule.
How about if we split them
Chair Bray, Mason Overstreet, staff attorney with Conservation Law Foundation, for the record, our recommended language on this. So Senator Watson raised this issue last week in regards to the exemptions. The language that we're looking at on page 13, line 11. This is just basically directing the rule in the rulemaking process. And Mr. O'Grady's point and Mr. Evans' point, our suggested language would be to say something along the lines of provide for certain regulatory exemptions under the rule, and the rule will be singular now versus plural, involving minor development activities with no adverse environmental effects. That would provide enough narrow direction basically for the rule, so as folks couldn't use it as a loophole and or say that this committee and or other folks during the legislative process were looking for larger extensions, right?
I'd say we captured and meet that objective through the non-reporting category. I mean, farmer is out there plowing his field, he doesn't need a permit. He wants to build a barn, he needs a permit.
Yes, I think the language that you suggested is in line with what we have. I would imagine it's not okay.
So that's a little more specific and it doesn't give the agency any difficulty from managing. Then can you either read that license again or
Like we want to read it
either
out loud.
send it to Mr. Brady for further possible revision by our council?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do that. I'm gonna put MO right next to that email. Thank you.
It's worth stating that through the education outreach process, that might, enlighten us in terms of exemptions, non-reporting activities, things like that.
So I think that means we're migrating to section 10 on page 10. Unless council has a question. Please on the discussion.
Sure. So this is the requirement that on report January 1, 2026, A&R got rules that establish a set of flood hazard area standards that all municipalities enrolled in NFID and required to adopt and administer. They shall contain standards that exceed the minimum of the NFID. Reducing flood risk to new development, ensuring new development does not create adverse impacts to adjacent pre-existing development. Any municipality with a municipal flood hazard area bylaw or ordinance shall update their bylaw to incorporate the state flood hazard area standards, and nothing shall prohibit a municipality from adopting or protective flood hazard standard of language and standards to and then on page 18, any municipality participating in NFIP shall update their standards and comply with the state flood hazard area standards by January 1, 2028. If they do not, then state flood hazard area standards shall become the applicable standards for regulating development and flood hazard areas. Question here, who does that permitting? So it's not clear.
I think from part of where that language came from is in our office, so we have new maps coming out from FEMA. Towns have to have an updated flood hazard bylaw on the date the maps come out, otherwise they're immediately suspended from the program. So no one can buy new policies of flood insurance and old ones can't be renewed. And so our concern is for towns that don't have the capacity or where we don't have a ton of capacity to do the bylaw things, like this could almost be like a trigger that goes into effect. Where they would have, and I don't know, like where the RPCs would think of this, but we have concerns of some regions like not being able to get all their towns updated by the time the maps come out, and that we would have like mass suspension of many towns.
And obviously, we have the town still have to adopt it. We have no ability to say, town, you will do this, and select boards actually being able to do that. So there's that challenge, so we have to work with our towns to encourage them to do that. The other kind of, the other concern I have about establishing a standard and requiring all towns to adopt it by said date is I absolutely appreciate the theory and it should make outreach and education easier, but the fundamental problem is, can they implement any flood hazard bylaw that they have? Are they tracking development that's occurring in the floodplain? Are they evaluating the value of those properties? I mean, all the stuff that I used to do this as a zoning officer in Maryland. It's complicated. And so my concern is, it's almost like saying, we understand you're having difficulty driving your Toyota Camry. So here's a Lamborghini, which hopefully you'll have better luck with that. So that's my concern. So I do what you want, but my recommendation would be, unless this messes up with the flood map, would be roll that into the study. Like, is that part of the solution of having, what does that actually get you by actually having towns? Are they the same standard? Because they all still have to meet the minimum NFIP requirements, right?
Yeah, from our perspective, there's two pieces to it. So one is that we're doing this mass file update, so it does allow for some level of ease of adoption. Understanding that study is still happening concurrently, that would come with some recommendations at the end of what do we look at for like a state versus municipal breakdown of regulation. So like one doesn't exclude the other. The other piece is my staff. We're down 2 positions and we have. Like as every time we interact with a town or a developer, someone calls us to ask us what every single interaction starts with opening up that bylaw because every single town is different.
Yes.
And it allows us some level of efficiency to be able to say, when we know you have to start here. You may have a handful of towns that exceed that, but those will likely be less than every single town being different. And so it allows us to be able to provide tools and support and efficiency in our staff side.
Uniformity. Yeah, Senator Watson.
So. If we adopt a statewide minimum standard. Does that increase your capacity? Or does that decrease your capacity?
I think it increases our capacity, because we're already doing the bylaw work that is required by FEMA, so that's already a staff effort being spent. By having a statewide minimum standard, I think then it allows us to standardize how we approach towns. And I think the study committee may look at, like, I think to Chris's point, or Mr. Kennedy's point, it's a good one, of like, does this become too sophisticated? It's harder for towns. I think the lens of like a no adverse impact standard allows for some, in that transition period, some level of higher assurance of reducing risk to new development or rebuilding development. And I think that it would allow, there may be some more complexities, but it wouldn't be just like wholesale. You can build if you want to, you can put new houses wherever you want to. So it allows some sideboards while a study committee would go forward to say, what is a breakdown or approach to statewide rule or development.
Is the statewide rule enough of an improvement for many municipalities that they'll get lower insurance rates from NFIP?
Not on its face alone. FEMA has a community rating system, the CRS, which can help to provide some discounts to flood insurance, but it requires municipalities to enroll in that program, which is a very big effort, and it requires ongoing administrative work to maintain that participation. We have talked with FEMA before about almost like just by the fact that our state has higher standards, do towns automatically get enrolled. They haven't allowed for that to happen. They're right now exploring changes that.
We're just trying to think of incentives, like so it's less of a regulatory push and more of an incentive move. Mr. Campany.
Just one last, I guess my primary point is just. I don't know that having a consistent statewide standard and having towns adopt it, I don't think it's necessarily going to solve the problem. So that part of getting, if it's part of addressing like the technical issues and the FEMA map update, that's fine. But if the suggestion, though, and I don't think this is back over, but just put this out there, I don't know that is unto itself going to solve the problem of municipal capacity to do that work. So, right, kind of increasing the standardized test standard, that's still not gonna help you learn, right? So that's the concern. So if you're approaching from the standpoint of efficacy of the new FEMA flood map rollout and town with it, that makes sense. But as far as like, to the extent this will ultimately solve the outcome of regulation of development of floodplains, and that is not gonna probably, in my estimation, that's probably not gonna be the outcome.
I don't disagree.
Well, and
It's a step.
yeah, so before we created a study committee, I think we had already kind of made the decision that to address that capacity issue, I know it involved a lot of staff, but that moving into the state then address you have a better standard, but can you implement question? And as part of the committee's effort to like take some pressure off the staffing demands. We're trying to find some sort of intermediate pathway that lets us maybe defer that decision without leaving ourselves in that awkward place. I can see how the 2028 date, if we haven't changed the landscape, capacity wise, won't necessarily get what everybody wants, so. Okay. There we go.
Mr. Chair, referring decisions by definition leaves us in awkward places. And when I asked earlier what the tiebreaker is, if you don't know what the tiebreaker is, then things are right for appeal, because the tie-breaking decision is sort of unknown and then left for a later decision.
You got a tiebreaker. They haven't adopted the state hazard areas by July of 2028, then that becomes the default. You just need to clarify who's gonna be the permanent. But you have Mr. Campion's concern that the municipalities aren't suitable for that, and maybe you need to adopt a statewide standard, but not make it mandatory, but have the state study committee recommend how to implement that standard, whether or not it's through a state system or through municipal system.
So, thank you, that was headed where I was trying to go, which is finance committee, of which we have 3 members, is trying to deal with how you permit solar projects or communications towers. And there's an objection when citizens of the town come in to appeal the application for solar projects. And what we're learning in that committee is that's not the time. The time to appeal is when the town plan or zoning is being written. That's what you appeal. You don't wait until it's been written and someone makes an application that conforms to the zoning. And it turns out to be in what most people would say was an abominable place. You're appealing the wrong thing, huh? Make any sense here? Yes. So if we allow towns or encourage towns to make their own decisions, the time for the citizens to weigh in is when those decisions are being formulated to adopt the plan, and people don't show up for that. They show up for the application, which is too late.
Oh, I think I was just going to agree with what Mr. Campany and then Mr. Ogre recharacterized, which was like, if you're going to create a study committee to look at the National Flood Insurance Program and how to better protect Vermonters in the floodplain and future development, it might make sense to fold all of this into a broadened scope study to say like, what are the opportunities with the state? What are the opportunities with the town? How do we create something that is both durable and actionable? And at what level of government do those things take place?
And FEMA's plans were born and grew in the inundation floods in the Midwest. And to say, we'll just follow FEMA is paddling up the wrong stream. They're tying ourselves to planning that doesn't fit our topography is perilous. So, but that's what we're considered doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to keep the minimum standard language in here, and I actually do disagree with the idea of having it be in the study rather than implementing now. And I understand the perspective, I really do. And I'm typically the person in this committee going, we don't burn in the towns. That's like my rally call. However, I do not believe, based on the testimony we've heard from the administration, that this is something that would be a burden to towns beyond. I mean, I think the support that they would get from the administration would actually be better than what they're receiving now. And would make it easier for them to actually do the minimum standard versus now where they aren't getting the technical support. I think it would then kind of move us in the direction of potentially having a different regulatory framework with the regional planning commission through the state taking it over, rather than having individual towns with their own individual ways of doing it. So I am in favor of keeping this language. I'm concerned we are running out of time on this conversation, and I just think this is a decision, not a debate at this point, is we have to decide, do we want a minimum standard or do we not want a minimum standard? And we are not going to have everyone agree on it, and I personally would vote to keep this language in and not roll it into the study committee.
So, I'm flagging this as an open question,
Okay, never mind.
let's, and we'll facilitate, my grandma would say, sleep on it, it will be clear in the morning. But let's leave that section unaltered.
Then
Can I give you one quick footnote, just to
Yeah,
So I have not had a chance having to digest S310, which is in Senate Government Ops. So apparently there's language in there also about the standard. So anyway, just whatever you guys decide, just a flag. You probably know this, so just a heads up, you may want to make sure that whatever you guys, that it all is working together.
And I think 310 is with, building codes.
No, 310 is our bill, I believe, in Senate Gov Ops.
So that they responds to flood, emergencies.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it would relate to that yet, but
We have the same language around building standard, like building codes. Better general things.
I'll just giving you a heads up, but whatever.
Bolton and Watson, I serve on Gov Ops in the afternoon, so we will keep it in mind.
I hope is that, and I thought the chair as well as with people, that you do complimentary pieces and don't thoughtfully complimentary and don't overwrite each other's word or leave a gap. So, okay,
Well, if that's an open question,
then I'll.
then the next 20 pages or 10,
Yeah, that's-
11 pages are open questions as well. You can skip to dams because the study committee. You don't know what's gonna be in the study committee. And you don't know what needs to be conforming in the municipal authorities and zoning bylaws. So you can just skip to dams, page 30.
Okay, so let's do that.
And really the first change there is page 36.
Can I undo what we're just doing here for a moment? Can we just, for the section that we're now gonna pass over, there are some grade lines.
Right, so that,
Can we just point out the clean in these grade lines, particularly all to river corridors?
right, because currently municipalities have the authority to regulate landfill development in river corridors, shorelands, flood hazard area. But you're gonna have a river corridor permitting program or A&R. So they won't be regulating river corridor development anymore municipalities. Unless they're delegated.
And it was only 10% of the colleges were currently regular.
So you would need to know that, and so if that's your choice. You're gonna probably have to strike this and add language about how municipalities can if they're delegated. So
That's what the great matter is. Okay.
And I only have a very small comment on page 21, the gray highlighted river corridor protection. Whatever happens with river corridors, they're construct or change. We would strike protection areas, river corridors. We don't have a dictionaries.
okay,
That was like a reference from previous mapping English
okay.
that didn't include about it.
So that's why river corridors are grade, anytime there's reference to it, it's grade. You just need to make that decision. So,
Yeah, so 21, 22, 23, if river corridor stays, we would just ask this rate for potentially area for that.
yeah.
Okay, so
And then the gray on page 25 in the study committee. The study committee, as the language was originally proposed, would have recommended whether or not to have state minimum flood hazard area standards. But you already had that earlier in the bill, so. And then. So that's great, just so you know that should come out. But it also now is great if you haven't made that decision yet. So. And then the transition, implementation appropriations, that really all depends on what you decide to do. You know, if you're gonna do flood hazard area bylaws. Or not. I think that the transition depends on what you choose to do, let's say.
So,
I stated my opinion, I don't.
yeah, we drafted, with the assumption that we are on forward. And the only question was, what was the regulatory? The permitting ranking and regulatory authority for, did that shift, did it go to the state or did they municipal?
For the flood hazard areas, yes.
Okay,
So, for purposes of time, I'm not gonna go over every section in the dam safety.
yeah,
Because you've seen that a few times.
so let's go to the thing that was the biggest.
Well, now page 36 is a change. It's in the. It's in the hearing that will be held. You wanted to be clear that the purpose of the public comment. And it was whether the project serves public good. And whether it provides adequately for public safety. That had been the standard on page 37, lines 1 through 10, but that was struck. And there was a request for that to be reincorporated in as the purpose of the hearing. And then on page 38, so the purpose of the hearing is public safety and determination of what needs to be done. You don't need to conclude public safety under the CPD.
Oh, yeah, we moved that up.
Which was, I believe, if you want that back in.
Yeah, Jones, if you would, right on, but look, there's something up with green on power, I think we like it to be in.
I was gonna go to, Mr. Greenberg first.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Ben Green, Assistant Chief Safety Engineer. Yeah, we'd advocate for public safety to be in the public good criteria, that list is not necessarily a priority list, and it's actually, but I would agree is the most important thing to be in there. To value safety, it's not in there.
Okay, so 16 through 19 on 36 are, agreeable with that, we're just being split.
Wait, no, actually, yeah,
Sorry.
Right, page 38, line
So
12 is
on your right,
what they want. Static, they want the structure to be removed. And sounds like Green Mountain Power is on the same page there.
Yeah, that's right, I think we would like to see it in both places, and then just one additional comment on in 1085 in this application period, appreciate that. Council added public safety into there. We did just have the additional suggestion that when it says the purpose of this public comment, add the words in review, just to make it explicitly clear that it's not just public comment period to look at public safety, but the department's review. Would also include the consideration of public safety.
Ms. Smith.
Just for the record, this language that begins at the top of page 37 that's struck through is an explicit reference to the process that the PUC currently employs when they review dam modification projects. The agency doesn't use exactly the same process. I mean, we have a lengthy public process and project review process with the applicant, but from our perspective, the language that was pulled from the top of page 37 and stuck in section 1085 is not necessary. Our public comment period is there for anyone to comment on any aspect of the project that affects them. And putting these parameters around it doesn't seem to serve a purpose from our perspective. I mean, we obviously, the public comment period is for comments on whether the project serves the public good and whether it complies with the requirements in 1086. But it also, you know, we encourage comments on other aspects of the project as well, and we're not sure why this is moved in here.
Okay, so for anyone who is speaking in favor of adding. This explanation of being eligible to be commented on. That are, by understanding, that's already eligible to be commented on without it. What is the, who's arguing and why is those reading conclusion of lines 16 to 9? Mr. Schwartz?
Yes, those are for GP. I would think we would welcome suggestions for where else we would put it, the impetus behind asking for the explicit calling out of public safety is that we don't just want public safety to be one of many considerations that the department takes into account when weighing these applications. It needs to be equally weighted against the other considerations. This is the, do we want to hit? We want public safety to be just one of many considerations that does not seem to be in line with the sort of philosophical intent of moving this jurisdiction over to the department.
So, Mr. Reed, I'm guessing that public safety always. Start the word always, please, well, no, but
Yeah.
it's always a consideration.
It's our number one.
Yeah. So I'm just puzzled a little why we need to. Restate that if it's inherent in chapter 170. Is it the section 1086? Provision that you're on to highlight?
So the concern here is that the department was giving due consideration to a list of 13 or 14 different inputs. And we would argue that public safety should be given greater weight in consideration than perhaps some of the other considerations that you've heard of testimony from dam owners that some of their, for example, water quality permits prohibit them from drawing dams down. A key piece of the operation of the hydro facility in advance of a significant water event is to draw down the water. We would not want to be put in a position of having to make a decision between violating a water quality permit or operating the dam to the greatest possible extent for public safety. And that's where we want public safety to be elevated, and right now, it would just be one of the considerations.
Has the state ever asserted that there's a violation and then acted on it from like an environmental standpoint when environment and public safety could have been seen to be in competition with one another?
I'm not aware of the state's previous action, but it just.
You're trying to cover a contingency. Okay. Ms. Smith and Senator Ward.
I think for the record, we don't disagree with Green Mountain Power's position. The concern is that this language seems to sort of limit what would be open for public comment, perhaps, or motivate what's open for public comment. And we don't want that outcome. We hear your concern about the necessity to consider public safety in the criteria for permitting. That's all.
It feels like we're dancing around something. If there was a explicit statement about in when there is a conflict between other considerations from public safety will trump those other considerations. I don't know if we say that somewhere wrong.
You may not be able to. Because
Of like
when the dam,
obligation.
yes. or the enforcement of the water quality standards. I don't know if you can say that any public safety standard or concern will supersede the water quality standards.
There is discretionary enforcement though by the agency, right?
There's always discretionary enforcement. They don't always do it correctly, but there's always discretionary enforcement.
Thank you, and this goes to sort of editing the fly, what if on page 37. Under public good, where we start that list. And it says shall give due consideration to, among other things, the effect of the proposed vote, blah, blah, blah. What if instead, it was called out there,
Yes.
shall give due consideration to public safety and among other things, the effect of the, which sort of calls it out of the list, brings it to the top. Recognizes that it's kind of the priority. But it is among other things.
Yes, and to Senator Watt's point, that's what I was actually hoping to see when we made that change originally, but it seems like we've created this we've added to the notice of application section to answer that. I don't know why we didn't do it that way, but frankly, it feels like we're spending a lot of time on this. So I'd be open to that point that Senator Watson is doing, or just not removing 13 and keeping it as is. I mean, I think either direction you see.
Yes.
So just to clarify, it would say shall give due considerations to, comma, among other things, comma, public safety and the effect the proposed project will have on.
Sure. That would work.
But then when we take out the,
And you take out public safety.
Yes.
But you would be taking out public safety.
No,
No, it's just moving.
it's,
More like highlighting.
I just want to make sure I understood this, Smith's comment that you you did not want public safety listed because you were to find public comment.
No, no, Senator,
I asked.
we want public safety listed in 1086 as a consideration for issuing a permit. The state was confused or concerned perhaps about the addition of this explicit language in 1085, which then directs the public comment period to consider whether the public good is served, because from our perspective, that is inherent in the public comment period. That is the intent of the state's comment period, is to get feedback on whether we're meeting the criteria outlined in 1086.
So we agree that the public safety is a legitimate question
Absolutely,
and that public comment is a good thing.
yes.
Oh,
Should I move on to the next change? That would be on page 40. 1089, you're striking that old irrelevant language with the approval of the governor. And striking state agency having jurisdiction is the department and part of the engineer. And then you have that question on page 40, lines 12 and 13, which you asked to gray or highlight differently. This had previously said the department shall review and approve or disapprove the report. And there was questions about their authority to disapprove.
it's pretty.
Then green, I just, as a general comment, the 1087 to 89 are a little awkwardly written as originally written, but. I guess from the standpoint of the program, I think the most important thing that kind of comes out of these two sections would be that the dam safety program. Have engineering staff that carries out the requirements of the statute and. As currently written, it seems as though. It's getting away from potentially getting away from that, we're not employing anymore, we're requiring an engineer. So from that standpoint, it's a little troublesome,
Can you, so are you focusing on lines like 8 through 11?
1089,
Yeah. The engineer conducting an investigation under this section shall be in the department or shall be operating under supervision of the department and independent consultant. Is that?
right, a couple of things going on there, like in terms of how that would, either for the engineering program, the engineering program needs to have engineers that can perform this work. There's gonna be cases where that's not gonna be possible, whether it's an emerging technology or something that we cannot have the expertise to opine on. We're gonna need to be able to get assistance, so we need to be able to have every available way to do that, in my opinion. So we need to be able to hire someone to do it, or we need to be able to require an applicant to do that, which is probably more realistic, generally speaking. There's a lab, but we, in my opinion, we have all applicants opened up to have that application reviewed by a capable and qualified engineer.
Okay, so, I'm also on the update, the option here to either do it in-house or hire it out. Do an independent consultant. Is that, binding in some way, or is it that we don't offer, the applicant is required to submit?
Or the applicant were required to do it. In addition, I think again, talk back to the original sentence where it got struck at the top of 10:9. With the approval of the governor, state each have a jurisdiction department. They used to say may employ, I guess. We've got rid of employ but require an engineer. So are we necessarily requiring that the density program will be staffed by engineers? I'm worried that we're not. That's my point. It's highly the technical department, that's how the staff by non-engineers.
Senator Watson?
Sorry, so you would prefer to go back to employ? I'm sorry, I'm just trying.
I think that I would refer to that also just before a simple one sentence statement that just says that, that an engineer defines who, the department will be run by engineers that requires the statute. I think it would be helpful.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I have to speak here, or will ask the department shall employ an engineer or engineers to perform the duties required by the statute.
And where would you put that?
In 1089.
Right at the top of that section.
Instead of that first sentence.
Yeah, it's admittedly awkwardly written, it's an existing context, so yes. This is, I think one of the challenges, I think the original construction of this was, it was designed for both the PUC and DEC, and there's two different ways that the historically regulated, and if we're trying to pull everything into fold everything into one under the department, then the department this is what the department does it.
Mr. Carpenter.
Chair Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee. Mr. Chair, do you think this section's even needed anymore? You just strike the whole thing? Because like you said, it's written for the PUC to employ an engineer when you have engineers already employed, but you're also consultants, so.
Right, I mean, I guess, my preference would be the statement I just gave, and then we also have the caveat where we could, hire a consultant if we need it, because there's gonna be potential cases where there's emergent technology that we're not qualified to opine on, we need assistance, or we have the authority to require the applicant to do that and submit information to us for our review and approval. That's
Okay.
the priority, I think.
Yes.
Sure, thank you, I'm fine with that language that you suggested.
So if you could just send it over to Mr. O'Grady and then we'll highlight it and back to it and see if we land in the right place.
Some lead into 1087 as well. That's it.
That takes you to page 41, liability for dam breach.
It's just that.
Yeah.
No deal.
And that's afternoon.
Yeah, so let's pause there. I'm glad we finished the bill off this morning. It's really. It's really surprising that we were able to do that. It's only throughout.
There's a couple of doozies later on too.
So, we'll be revisiting our schedule, but actually Thursday, Friday are blank, and it was not for nothing that they were blank. All right, So you can send that language to Mr. Brady to make, we'll get, put that in. Put my flag of we stop here, at top of page on 41. If you have something, before I flag that, if you have something you wanted to say in a prior section.
Or we have a small fire sections, that's the resource get over.
Okay, so why don't you send any suggestions for any 89, for a survey, and then when we pick that up, we can see it in writing, and it'll be helpful to people to make decisions between laid out. Thank you, everyone. Some edits are easier than others. This is one of the more challenging, I know. Mr. Brady, are you, maybe your meetings for the balance of the day? I think we'll come back on it. Then I think to be able to catch up and.
I'm not, I'm gonna be redrafting this bill.
So I will, like to make an appointment for this afternoon to continue, while you're redrafting.
Okay.
See if we can, do some clarifications as well, get over further for tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Please watch the agenda. I think for instance, yeah, we may make some adjustments, so we stay on this task, until we've finished. And then, for instance, the visit with the secretary on budget, we don't need to hear the budget before we finish the work. So we'll reschedule, give us time back.